Okay, that's better.
This tells you a little bit about what this show is going to be like, is that I'm finishing this coffee and I've brought this one.
You see what's right here.
Yes.
My coffee is never out of my
already
reach.
almost to the backup.
I love it. Well, let's see what it takes to get there. I was thinking this morning about augmented reality. I have no other topic on the top of my head.
Mhm.
That's the one that for years, starting with things like, Magic Leap and even just the concept of it, where you can start to picture that, hey, this is going to be a thing. Even, something like Minority Report or whatever is always the thing that people like to think of, right? Except you're wearing it, it's on your face. And once that gets dialed in, we're going to arrive. I think we're going to ultimately arrive at a place where this stuff's wired into most people's visual cortex. I mean, it's going to get weird. But the pathway to that is still hardware. And that's external hardware, which apparently Apple has translated into lightweight ski goggles that you wear around. Which is, that's the
handsome.
It's the
and they're projecting your face onto the front of the screen, which when I first saw it, I was like, it's transparent. That's exactly what I thought it would be, like projecting into the glass, and you're still seeing through the glass, but it's not true. It's
not true. It's all lies.
Completely obfuscated, and it's projecting your little face on the front of the screen, which I think is hilarious.
It's like the uncanny valley thing, popping up.
Totally.
And it's just like, okay, you must defeat that at all costs in that particular hardware. So, in that sense, it's really impressive, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's even something right out of the gate, basically, that they're doing. I think the thing that excites me the most is, as a designer for years, I've kind of been saying, like, that's the thing that I have the most excitement about. And even prior to AI being kind of a thing that can help drive all of this technology, it's just the form factor and the idea. And I'll use one quick example of the thing that intrigued me the most.
So the thing you're most excited about is wearing goggles, or just the AR on the whole?
I think about how cool people look in the ski towns over the winter, walking around with the puffy head.
Especially when they take it off and they've got the red line around their
exactly.
cheeks. Yeah, that's right.
And I just think, man, there's nothing that says I'm a sporty, fit, awesome dude than wearing goggles. So yeah, the form factor is a little problematic. I think I actually said to my wife that once they get it to like safety glasses style, that's really going to be the main, I think, point of sort of ubiquitous adoption for more consumer level, people.
It's funny how many speed bumps that vision related tech has had, because we've had, Google Glass, and there was the Snapchat glasses, whatever those were called, Snap Glass or something. And then there was, right. In just a couple of years ago, Ray-Ban put out their sunglasses with little cameras in them that were kind of terrible. And now Apple, like the Apple of all technology, if anybody can make this sexy, it's them. And this first one just does not look like something you'd wear walking around, or want anybody to see you, like catch you wearing it.
Right. And I think that's not yet the point, right? Like that's the thing, is like that hardware form factor restriction that they have. And that's what I love about, I think, the way that they're approaching it, which ties me exactly back to that example that I was thinking. One of my clients is, so some of their products are like air suspension systems for, commercial and heavier duty trucks, right? And so one of the things that I help them do is completely redesign and reconfigure and rebrand their entire installation guide system. And we literally cut, I think it was 90%, they told me at one point, of customer calls later that are trying to install these things. I mean, literally customer service calls dropped by that amount. And so I've always been excited about, well, instead of flipping through, 8.5 by 11 sheets that are really clear and easy and step-by-step, I'm picturing, at least techs in the professional setting wearing these goggles and going, as a designer, how do I approach that so that when they're looking at the undercarriage of a truck suspension system, in this case, they have augmented reality tools that show them exactly how this thing is supposed to go in real time. And now with the AI layer being able to accurately read and see what they're dealing with, And to be able to approach that as a design challenge, like for me, that's the most exciting part because it's actual, like the dude's literally going to have greasy hands. I mean, he's like
Yeah.
literally going to have covered grease fingertips. He can't touch the arguably sexy goggles under the truck, right? And so, like, that's as real as it gets. And
He's
yet,
gonna
what are
have
you
smudgy fingerprints all over his projected face.
exactly? It's going to look real because, yeah, he's normally all dirty anyway. So, I think that that's such I love the practicality of that application because it's an industrially specific, usage that I think is, I mean, you cut that guy's time in half at least.
Oh yeah.
At least, those goggles pay for themselves real fast. Now, of course, the cost to develop all that stuff, I'm not going to be cheap, but still, you extrapolate that over a large enough industry, and these are game changing. And there's one
Mhm.
more example before I shut up about this. I think about growing up building houses with my dad. And one of the things that anybody who spent any time in, at least normal, what we call stick frame construction with lumber, you lay out studs for your walls
Mhm.
and you do that on the floor first. So you lay those all out in the United States. That's 16 inches on center convention. You have what's called a cap plate and what is it? A cap plate for the top and a sill plate for the bottom or a base
Mhm.
plate. And then you line out those studs in between. And so guys are constantly putting those base plate and cap plates together, drawing out their measuring tape and marking by hand, little
Oh
lines
yeah.
every 16 on center that they then line the studs up to and nail them. Just very utilitarian. If you're wearing goggles like that, you literally have the overlay of the entire freaking blueprint of the house as you work, all the way down to the step that you're working on. You think about guys roofing, simple. This is very simple, pragmatic, blue collar stuff. You have to chalk lines to keep them straight. You have to start and stop at a certain point. All of that could be augmented,
Mhm.
all of it. And you would be on target, picture perfect. And again, I would argue almost twice as fast. So when I think about these goggles from that standpoint, all of the industrial applications, and then for as a designer, like what that would mean for the end user, that's the thing that super excites me.
Yeah, a couple of things kind of went through my head as I was seeing about Apple's headset was, the first thing that hit me was like eye fatigue. So when you're looking at this extremely high definition screen that's literally what 1 or 2 inches away from your eyeballs, like how exhausting that brightness level could be, or I guess on the flip side, if you're outdoors building a house, laying out a frame, and it's a really sunny day, you could dial back how bright it is. So maybe it sort of works as eye protection as well.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really interesting. The hack, and you kind of alluded to this a second ago, was the idea of like eventually this thing's going to be tied to our brain, or we're going to have tech that is going to be a little more invasive. And I think the brilliant hack that Apple's using here is eye tracking. So it's like as close to something literally being part of what's happening inside your brain and your thought process, but it's able to look at that external signal of where your eye's pointing and to use that as the sort of as the mouse. So as opposed
Yeah.
to when we talk about Minority Report and the hands up and swiping pages left and right, we're literally doing that with our eyeballs and then just sort of pinching to click. So I thought that hack alone was pretty ingenious for them to figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. And to not be limited. I mean, again, the Minority Report comparison, where he's still in a set environment, really.
Yeah.
Whereas this, you go wherever that you
Hmm.
want. And again, the AI layer is the thing that when I first started really thinking about this technology wasn't there yet. And so we think about something as simple as Tesla's, autopilot or Mercedes or whatever, where they have these
Hmm.
high level visual systems that recognize the world. They're literally able to say, yeah, that's a building and that's a door and that's a window, or whatever it is if you're walking around. And you can overlay anything onto those. And you think about the worst of that, which is like driving down your normal four laner in some suburbia, community or whatever,
Hmm.
outside of a city, and you've got thousands of billboards, and signs and just visual garbage that litters our space now, right? Well, now it's just like, oh, well, we're just going to bring that all to your face. Like that's the worst.
Right.
Like you imagine all the helpful things about walking down a city street, but then imagine like the free flow of advertising just flooding into that, where the worst website experience ever of pop-ups and ads and all that garbage are fed into your visual cortex. I mean, that's what the big corporations are excited about, right?
Mhm.
And so then that makes me think about the, gosh, I hate to say ethics, man, but it's true. Like what happens? Where's the bifurcation between the person who's walking around without that technology and the billboard's relevance to that individual versus the person who's got the tech? I mean, that's already changed with phones.
Right.
Everybody's walking around like this all day, staring down at their phone, right?
Right.
They don't look around to see all the signage and everything. So a lot of people have figured, hey, we got to get them there.
Mhm.
It's changed it. So I can't even imagine if it's literally integrating into our entire visual cortex. That's going to get kind of weird.
Yeah, it's interesting how many movies have gone this route too, with this dystopian thing. And, before it was a movie, the Ready Player One book, like it was this idea that we're so immersed and it's this really trashy landscape of a planet that we live on. And it's both like people just sit around in their trailers and they're stuck on their headset all day and they live in that virtual world. So I think, finding the balance of that we don't end up in that other ditch, I think is going to be pretty important as a species, that we don't let this thing take us too far the wrong direction.
What if you had to place a bet today, knowing what you know about phones
Right.
and how we're already these sort of odd cyborg mechanisms that are
Hmm.
attached to this device we hold in our hand all the time? And now we have the ability to put it on our face and it's hands free. And I would argue, not, I don't know if it's not 10 times. I don't think it's 100 times. I think it's 1,000-fold magnitude difference in terms of how we can interface now with the world because of this simple technology.
Hmm.
And not to mention night vision, FLIR,
Yeah.
X-rays, things like that. I don't think X-rays could quite be there yet, but you get
Right.
the point, right? I don't think people are ready for just how significant this shift is going to affect them.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a big difference too between, if this ends up, or maybe difference between the feel of it is if this ends up where everything really does stay closed off and you're always wearing this mask and experiencing it inside of the mask versus the degree to which we'll be able to project and see it sort of outside of the mask.
And
So
that's
whether it's a clear lens or whatever, to have real daylight and see other people and see other expressions and uh I don't know. I think all the dystopian versions are when you're sort of locked into these goggles and that's the only world you see.
I agree, man. And that was the point you were making before. And now that I'm like getting that sunk into my skull, this is something that I think we are seeing the fork in the road. This is why
Hmm.
AR has always been so exciting to me because AR doesn't separate you from the loved ones next to you. And I found it really interesting because a lot of the people who are criticizing the Apple glasses, and I think even, is that what they're calling it, by the way? Is it officially?
Vision
What's the
Pro, Apple
Vision Pro?
Vision
Thank
Pro.
you.
Yeah.
The design and branding gods are like, shame. I'm going to all atone later. But anyway, so Vision Pro goggles, right? I mean, it even, obviously the quote unquote competitor is Meta, with the Quest
Right.
and every Oculus,
Hmm.
whatever, line. And so I think even Zuck said something along the lines of, well, the thing that bothered him is that in the advertisements or the promos or whatever, the people were always sitting alone. And we want to be social. We want to be, the people that
Mm-hmm.
connect people. That's our aim. And I found that really interesting because in a true VR environment, you are locked 100% into that headset. You will literally trip and fall and damage yourself if you walk around with
Yeah.
that thing, right? And that's the thing that AR offers that VR doesn't is I can turn and look at my wife or kids next to me
Yeah.
and all of us wearing stupid goggles together, right? Interfacing whatever world we want onto our living room. But the
Bumping
point is,
goggles into one another.
let's not go there,
It's
Josh.
gonna get
So,
real weird.
it's going to get real weird.
It's gonna get real
So
weird.
I think that that's the thing that is interesting about the little kind of branding and positioning war too, is I'm like, well, the AR technology is the one that actually allows you to interface between a completely false reality or just an augmented reality
Yeah.
where we're overlaying the same information. And
Hmm.
so I don't know if that was just a matter of, did Apple miss that point? Did they not care? Is it something else we want to go after? Is that just naysaying later because it's easier in
Hmm.
hindsight to pick out the one thing they didn't get right, you know what I mean, or whatever. But I still think that that's the technology that is going to allow us to maintain the most presence in the real physical world while also unlocking all of the benefits and technologies that come downstream of that thing.
We do have an Oculus at the house, and the only reason we have an Oculus at the house is because on my other podcast a couple years back, I had a chance to preview a film that was created entirely for Oculus. And it was, I think the title is something like "When You Wake to the End of the World," and it was about the time a few years back in Hawaii where there was this false nuke warning that there was an incoming
Oh
ballistic
yeah.
missile. And I sort of vaguely remember that as a headline, but that was a real lived experience for people who were on the Hawaiian Islands, that they thought they were kissing each other goodbye and they were trying to run for cover and all kinds of craziness. So it was a really interesting film that was really taking advantage of where Oculus was at the moment in terms of like, it's kind of a weird mix of like 3D and graphics and vector stuff and voiceover and music. So when you got your eyes covered and your ears covered, and then you're watching this really intense story play out, it was like physically draining in a way that watching a stressful or suspenseful movie on your sofa has never been. So it'll be interesting for me, and that's on Oculus, which was like such a step down from where Apple's at, and the resolution is not at the same place, but like to see how the physical experience of consuming media when it's an inch from your face and you literally can't look away,
Yes. Yeah.
how different that experience is going to be.
Yeah. I mean, that's the stuff that we always think about, the first, second, and even perhaps third order, of events after a chain. If you can even think the first order, great. If you can get to the second, you're way ahead of the curve. And then I don't know if you can even get to the third realistically. But
Right.
that's the thing that we all can picture how at a certain level of technological advancement, this stuff becomes completely 100% real. And
Hmm.
so we imagine, just even with the Vision Pro goggles or whatever, you, God forbid, when they bring out the Resident Evil game, for Vision Pro, right? I
That's
mean,
that's going to
they
be 1 year in tops,
and
right?
it's your own home, or
Yeah.
wherever. That's what I'm talking about. Like, that's
Brings
the
a whole
difference.
new meaning to the calls coming from inside the house.
Right. Like, this is true terror. And we haven't even scratched the surface of biofeedback, which is absolutely a thing. Your Apple Watch could even do a certain level of that right now. It could measure your heart rate and very simply ramp up or ramp down, the thrill and
Right.
ride the curve of, adrenaline and sheer terror
Yeah.
and whether or not
If
you wet
you
your
think
pants.
your kids are scared of the monsters in their closet and under their bed before they play that game in AR, you're going to have to sell that house.
There's no safe place, man. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, it's going to go there, right? Everything that we can possibly picture and imagine is going to happen. This is
Hmm.
2006, where the concept of apps is coming out for the first time. And we're thinking, like, wait a minute. Oh, you can just build these little things that live on the device and aggregate all the data down to a simpler interface. And wow, that's really
Hmm.
interesting. And look at the explosion that came out of that. And this is like, that's laughable in terms of the power of what this thing can do next. And so it,
Hmm.
it truly is the new frontier. I mean, it's been that way for a while now for the people thinking about it. And it's like this convergence of all the coolest technologies that we have right now,
Hmm.
from biosensors to AI to now visual interfaces that integrate with our reality. Um, I don't think I can't think of any movie or any sci-fi, anything ever, who's even scratching the surface of where this thing can actually go.
It was really interesting. We talked about Minority Report earlier. That's something that came up in a talk I did a couple of years ago, where they actually brought futurists together, and Spielberg put together this think tank of working futurists to say, what might life look like 30, 50 years from now? What technologies could we include in this film to make it feel realistic? And it was something like in 2007, an article came out and said, could some of the technologies from Minority Report come true in our lifetimes? And like 4 years later, there were like 12 of them that were already true. So we went like the curve of acceleration on these technologies has just gone faster and faster and faster. And it's almost like if you want to see what the next big thing is, just look at what's in Minority Report that hasn't come true yet.
Yeah.
And there's a really good chance that that's what's next. Um, it is wild how much that film in particular has sort of paved the path for what our future and technology has looked like.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's putting the face to the name, of the ideas, especially when you think like, I'm a big After Effects junkie, and being able to like, do things that, I mean, you're literally creating fantastical worlds and,
Hmm.
information and the way that something could be, you can imagine it and show it. And again, this is all going to be just amplified through the roof.
Hmm.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, the change is exponential. It's a hockey stick. It's not a linear ramp. And that's just going to get more and more weird, where it's less and less likely that somebody can say, "Hey, is that going to happen in our lifetime?" And it's not actually going to happen in our lifetime. Like it probably will. Like we're there's a term for it, and I'm spacing it, but it's basically, what is it? The great filter, basically, is the term, right? Like we're either going to destroy ourselves or all this stuff is going to happen.
Right.
And so that Minority Report baseline is so interesting because you're like, yeah, what boxes are left to check? My secondary concern is like, at what point do we take the fork in the road over toward the Matrix? And that's where we're
Right.
really going to go.
Just plug it
um,
right into the brainstem and
yes, because
call it a
we're already
day.
playing with it.
Right.
That's a technology that we're playing with. And, that brings me back to something that's interesting, because when we first started talking about augmented reality, it was very obvious that, okay, well, first of all, we could play with an iPad or your iPhone and do it, as a secondary device. Anything with a
Hmm.
camera, you could kind of do it. But
Yeah.
we all knew that getting it onto your face and surrounding your visual cortex so that it actually became the part of your natural environment was really the next step. And I think everybody knew that, well, that's going to be some kind of goggles, it has to be.
Hmm.
Even again, when you think about the form factor of safety glasses or something, that's not going to give you as much opportunity to work as if it completely entirely takes up your entire visual cortex. You're still going to have that peripheral vision that's going to see out of that kind of thing. And maybe there's some ways around it, but at the end of the day, you've got to take up that visual field if you want it to feel real. And so then the next level is people, okay, well, there's these sensor technologies and display technologies and contact lenses, where the display technology is there for the most part. It's the power, it's the battery, it's actually getting, and even the Vision Pro,
Hmm.
right? It's limited by the form factor because it can't physically put that kind of computing power and battery power into it.
Yeah,
And
it's funny.
so,
I don't think they really talked about that at all in the keynote about the power source, which makes me wonder if there's like a belt or a backpack or is it plugged into the wall or it just,
yeah, no, I think it is. I think it is. I
yeah,
think it's a, isn't it like a little fanny pack belt thing? We're going to sound like
yeah.
we didn't watch any of this stuff, but I was so enamored by
Well,
what the
I
actual
missed that
goggles are
detail.
doing. But yeah, no, I think it's got an external, I think it's for power and computing. If I recall correctly, I don't care how accurate or inaccurate it is, but at the end of the day, the next step is clearly to get the form factors down to where it is just a simple wearable thing. I mean,
Yeah.
that's where Zuck is going to go. Our Oculus Quest, they're not the same product. They're not doing the
Hmm.
same things. And
Yeah.
even inside the world of VR, when you're tethered to a PC, it's a completely different thing than something like an Oculus,
Hmm.
and they're supposed to be. So the question is, do we go to the contact lenses next, right? That was where everybody was like, well, you could get it down to that. And I think that's completely out the window and gone and a waste of time now. I think everybody is going directly to, how do we wire up your visual cortex
Hmm.
with every other facet of your brain? And if people haven't gotten past the whole, oh, AR is going to kind of make the world weird thing, they're
Right.
not going to deal well with Neuralink and these other, brain interfaces.
Well, it'll be interesting too. I mean, maybe this is a huge logical jump, and I'm not a physicist, as we talked in the last show, but if I can charge my phone by just touching it to a thing, it just makes me wonder, is it possible to just put something on my head, like without drilling a hole, without having to
Mm.
have, you know, things connecting and actually breaking through the skin? Could I have something that I just go like this and have that same sort of connectivity? Or that I can send that same sort of signal. I mean, we know that we're very electrically driven beings, so it doesn't seem like the biggest reach that there's something that we could use to kind of grasp that power. But again,
Yeah. Well, so
that's
the
not my world.
right, yeah, the current challenge really is resolution is how we would, I think about it and describe it,
Right.
and which is great. I love that as a visual term because we deal with resolution all the time as designers visually. But
Right.
you can right now put caps on that have sensors all over them that can detect certain activity in brain, like brain scanning or like where,
Hmm.
your neural activity is happening. But the resolution is ridiculously poor because
Hmm.
they in from what I had read too, you have like the surface area itself of like the brain, but obviously all the way down into the depths of the middle of our brains and the base of our brains, those are all computing and running signals. And we all know a brain is a tangled mess of, all of
Right.
that visually, let alone when you get down to the neuron level. And so being able to read that energy from, is that on the surface? Is that 3 centimeters deep? Is that the amygdala? Well, where's this coming out of? So we can kind of do that, but it's super low resolution. So when
Hmm.
we talk about being able to restore motor function or affect any of your cognition at the end of the day, but any of your sensory inputs, that's where the resolution has to be close enough, and that's where things like Neuralink, these invasive procedures, as they call them, like they're really still just kind of wiring up the neighborhood. I don't even know if the resolution that's not even necessarily accurate. I don't even think it would be the neighborhood at this point. It's like maybe like the planet in the solar system we're kind of getting close to. You know what I mean?
Right.
When the ultimate goal is the like grain of sand on the
Right.
beach,
Yeah.
and that's tough as a challenge to say the least. The question, of course, is do we need to get to that level of resolution in order to make the cognitive impact that we need and will our brain do the rest? That's the really interesting question is do we have to fill in those gaps knowing that the brain can fill those gaps in for us?
Hmm.
So we can almost like it's like roughing in an outline and your brain will fill in the story for you as long as that
Yeah.
outline's correct. So it's really fascinating to me, man, because I go back to this is human brain again with the AI element, everything changes,
Hmm.
everything changes. And just being able to read visually, what the world is around you and augment that. Um, it's impossible to imagine a world that wouldn't be Matrix like at that
Hmm.
point, quite
Right.
frankly.
Well,
Bringing
I
it
think we're
down.
done here.
So I'm gonna
Check,
go
please.
yeah, check the garden, and I think we're gonna go to an island. Um yeah, so again, that's the dystopian thing. I mean, we can go that route.
It's
Now
kind of hard to not land at that place when you see this thing and there's so many unknowns and how odd it is to see even, even an Apple keynote commercial quality presentation, as beautiful and sexy as they make these things, it still is like a strong element of icky, right? Like it's weird to see a person wearing things covering their face and they're experiencing all the stuff inside this lens.
yes, yes, there's this thing that separates us now from the human element. Man, I love this stuff. It's not a physics show. I don't know if it's not a philosophy show. I kind of feel like it might be all of these a little bit.
It might be a little bit
Um,
of all this.
when we talk about that philosophical side, like the dehumanization of things. So I've
Hmm.
posted some content about that and gotten a little mouthy about how marketers dehumanize people, which
Hmm.
is shocking to most. It hurts their feelings
Right.
when they hear me say you are dehumanizing people. And so even language like target audience,
Hmm.
in my opinion, that is a form of dehumanization at a certain scale because
Yeah.
you're just lumping all these people together in a generality that you think combines them all. And look, man, we can go into things like training for war, you
Yeah.
know,
It's a
and
lot of war language that happens in the marketing world. The
it is.
it with sort of a seek and destroy
I know.
mentality of how do you find them and capture them and target them and
Yeah. Destroy the competition,
right.
outmaneuver.
Hmm.
There is a ton of that, and I know there's a lot of people out there, with sort of a anti-military analogies in the corporate world angle, which I think is kind of true. I get it.
Yeah.
I get both sides. I understand. But at the end of the day, it's at the end of the day, I wonder, are we fixating on the wrong goal, right?
Hmm.
Like competition to the nth degree, that is our base human nature. But we also have cooperative elements where everybody can win, right? And at the
Hmm.
expense of somebody suddenly thinking I'm sympathetic to socialism. Let me just dispel right off the bat. My blood type is coffee and capitalism, and both are C, so they're there. But I think that the question is, what's the outcome? What's the goal? And if you have a goal where, well, one monopolistic entity can't possibly serve everyone the best. In fact, they
Yeah.
devolve into worse service.
Hmm.
So why are we saying, oh, it's cool for that one entity to have everything through measures that get outside of the control of anybody else, at a certain point? Like, it just gets the consumer can't even do anything about it. You think of, like, how many options do you have for internet service, for example, right?
Right.
This is why they're freaking out about Starlink, because now
Right.
suddenly everybody has an alternative, right?
Right.
Now that's still kind of monopolistic in that way, but the point is,
Hmm.
we don't have 35 options that would then help us go, well, I have the best option for me. Anyway,
Right.
all of that to say, it makes me think about these things like Vision Pro goggles and Apple controlling that. It makes me think about the large corporate and government entities that will control the funding and the technologies that go into these, because their scale is required to tackle a challenge this big.
Hmm.
And now you have this problem where, okay, so if you're a member of 1,000 corporate entities that wants to control a populace, let's just say, right? It's very difficult to mobilize that and get on the same page. And how do you even control that? You can control one market, one industry, one segment of the audience, whatever. Or you could just go to a government that controls them all. So now I have one thing to convince instead of millions of people to convince. Well, that's
Right.
easier, right? And that's how
Hmm.
we end up with lobbying and nonsense like that. So I guess all of that comes back for me of this, like, dehumanization thing. And I think we're going to have to come up with this, like, human ethics standards and get on the same page real quick, because
Hmm.
already in AI we're seeing that as an issue. That, how do we know that they are going to have the same priorities that we are? And with a sufficient enough technological advancement, that could go bad real fast. And not just like, oh, they could learn, you know, how to synthesize atoms into whatever compound they want and literally, reduce us to a pile of carbon, right? Like, we don't even need to go there. It's just a matter of, well, what happens when your brain interface is wired up to this centralized bit of information? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Or sources, or you're heavily reliant on that. I mean, that, again, it's hard not to get dystopian when you start thinking about that and who controls the levers of all this.
Yeah, it sort of takes the messaging or the the ability to channel propaganda to a whole new level. Like, you see these weird compilations of the news channels all saying the
Yeah.
same language, word for word for word. And then what happens when it's all being funneled just to your face, like all to the same place? Instead of having, as Bruce Springsteen said, 57 channels and nothing on, like, what happens when it's all just one thing and it's coming to your eyeballs directly, and to your neighbors and to your spouse and your kids? That really does start to feel like a passive version of of the Matrix.
Oh man, for any, like, Dr. Evil corporate
Right.
executives listening to
Exactly.
this right now, they're getting
Exactly.
really excited.
We just gave them some really good
They're like,
ideas.
this is really awesome. I think what's so interesting to me is the layers between those entities and the individuals continue to just collapse. And
Hmm.
so in the past, we had something, for example, if you wanted to get a message to somebody in the next county, it could take days,
Right.
like, let alone to convince them, influence their, decision making or their emotional
Yes.
states.
Days and horses.
Right. Exactly. And now we have this scenario where we can homogenize, to your point, a
Hmm.
media narrative
Right.
and feed that out to a populace, which then gets them glued onto one common idea. And it's the
Hmm.
funneling of the collective mind, right? That's the purpose. We all talk about this in marketing, design, advertising, all that stuff. We talk about funnels all the time. That's what they're doing. And so when they work together to funnel the collective mind towards one objective, that's a very intentional act. Out of all of the disparate thousands of things that we could be talking about and focused on, no, we're going to funnel the collective mind down to this one narrative. Because when you get people down to binary narratives, it's very easy to manipulate them. But there's still layers between the manipulation. For emotion to enter the picture, we have to have tribal associations. We have to go, ooh, that person hates me, and that stokes, a negative response in me, or that person loves me and I feel loved. When that's wired into our brains, the words don't matter anymore. They don't have to say anything. They can affect your emotional response without a single word of communication. And that's the thing that these are the second and third order of effects that people, I think it's easier to understand them when you see them happen in like sequential 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, and then go, that collapses now down into a microsecond. And you have no idea what's affecting it and why that's happening. It's like people who fall in love and it's like, hey, explain what happened. And they're like, well, I don't know. Shakespeare couldn't even do it. Right. And so but they just feel it. And that brings me back and makes me think about how we talk about this all the time in branding and messaging, that it's emotional. You are playing an emotional game. We are connecting with their emotions so that they feel something before they do something. And that's really the hallmark of the best branding.
Let's imagine for a second that our corporate overlords have the best possible intentions with this thing. What's the optimistic version of this? Like we've kind of gone down a couple of dark pathways here, and which is really funny because between the two of us, we're two of the most optimistic people that I know. And if it's setting off alarms for us,
right,
then we're not the only ones. But and this is something I haven't dwelt on a lot, but one of the things that I heard somebody talk about, which again, I could go down all the reasons why this is not good, but on the optimistic side is kind of the virtual tourism side of it, or the ability to experience places and see things that you've never seen before. And, to gauge something like the Great Pyramids is maybe a good example. Like, could I walk up the pyramid, a thing that maybe you're not allowed to do in person, or could I go walk around and look at the Sphinx and see all the ins and outs of what's happening in that area of the world or wherever in the world? So, like, other things for you that you think are interesting from an optimistic use of the technology?
Well, thank you for pulling me back from the abyss. I mean, I have publicly stated that black-pilled people are absolutely the worst and most boring people on the planet. So I have to uphold my reputation of like, let's knock off with all the doomsday crap that people have said for thousands of years, shall we? And just focus on acute problems. This is what excites me. Okay, so when I think about the glorious future of the AR or even fully integrated experience, first of all, to use your example of something like the Great Pyramids, okay, I can go there right now. I can fly to Egypt and I can go and I can walk around it and see it and smell it and get the whole experience. There's a 1% chance that in our lifetime we're not going to have technologies that gets so close to that it's almost indistinguishable. I really do believe that. I think there will always be a real layer there that they can never cross. And that's totally legit. But the bottom line is not nobody, but very few people could go around the entire world or galaxy for that matter, obviously, and experience everything. So people will find this appealing. That's the very first layer. The second layer that I get really excited about is, wouldn't you like to have been there when they were building them? Or, when the aliens built them.
So many questions.
Yeah, exactly. Wouldn't you love to have seen that? Wouldn't you love to be like, you're one of the people right now helping to build those? You're one of the view from overhead of the funeral procession as they, took the bodies in the sarcophagus, into the whatever. So that's the kind of thing that really excites me, is you think about just using these as a tool of teaching history, for example, right? And going back to like how these things worked and what they did and what those people felt. We would have a very different, I think, empathetic approach towards the people who existed in the past and also the people today who live in other places. I think that there's a I fall on the line of optimism, like that you just mentioned, that the world is getting better,
Hmm.
that we're actually getting better. I don't believe in this, like, oh, we're slowly descending to hell in a handbasket. I really don't. I think when we look at war, disease, rape, murder, stealing, theft, like obviously that stuff's always, it's part of the human condition. It's always going to exist. But
Hmm.
it is, by all measurable metrics, it is better than it has ever been across the planet. And so I get excited about that. I get excited about right now, I can Zoom call, you know, yesterday I had a call with a guy in Bali. You know what I mean? I had to have it at 8 a.m. I never take calls at 8 a.m. because it's 8 p.m. at his time. And so I had this really great conversation with this guy on the other side of the planet on an island. That feels like magic in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. It really
Right.
does. But
Hmm.
now imagine that we have our AR experience and we literally feel like we're in the same room together, hanging out together,
Hmm.
and then that doesn't even include the brain interfacing. Once you start doing that, where we smell the same thing, we
Yeah.
literally, hear the same thing in spatial audio. It's like all that stuff is going to be very real. And I think that that type of connection with people on the other side of the planet from different cultures, different languages that are automatically translated, by the way, like that is a humanizing element. That's the opposite of this dehumanized matrix, horrible, farm people for their life energy source crap that
Right.
Dr. Evils want to do. So I get excited about that for sure. Not to mention things like limb function restoration, restoring blindness, sight in blind people. I mean, what a huge advancement for humans when we finally get to that point, and we're really close.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Even little things like FaceTime, like that's a pretty magical technology that we can have a video call. I mean, children of the 70s, 80s, 90s, even we had talks of like, oh, someday you'll just be able to see the person as you're talking to them.
Yeah.
Uh, and now we can actually do that anywhere in the world and get like a super high resolution view of that person as you're talking to them. And how much further is this going to take that experience? I mean, the whole like weird, it makes your avatar out of you based on what your face is doing. It's not really video. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to stay in the optimistic category, but I think the experiential side of that is really interesting and such a huge leap forward.
Absolutely.
Uh, and to think about that then across getting multiple people on a call together, and then you can sort of see them in a room. Like, what's the Zoom experience, quote unquote, like when it's in this Vision Pro headset and you've got meetings with people and you can see somebody writing on the whiteboard and you can, have something that feels more like an in-person interaction. I think that could be really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And again, the black pill people are like, oh, then they're all just gonna sit in their trashy trailers like Ready Player One and never talk to you. I think that you have to distinguish between, again, the kid in Bali that I talked to, he can't physically get to me.
Hmm.
So what am I supposed to do? Well, it's not real life. Sorry, you're not meeting my standards. That's ridiculous.
Right.
And so, yes, I know that there are risks, but this goes back to that ethics idea and the sort of what are the new rules of the game? We're just playing around here in the kiddie pool. We're going to have to jump in the deep end at some point. We better start understanding what that's going to mean and how we need to live and work. We've seen that with social media. Look at how that has changed. That technology has completely changed how people communicate and receive information. And
Hmm.
we're not going to get that right off the bat. But already since the beginning, we've started to dial in like, okay, these are guidelines for how to not come across as an insane person. This is going to help you communicate better. I know that they're anonymous, but how do you sleep at night when you're a piece of trash, preying on that? You know what I mean? Like it's getting further and further marginalized for those people who act like that. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Right.
And I think even more compassion for that we see, like, man, that's a dark place when you're,
Hmm.
picking fights with strangers on the internet or something. That's just, you're in a dark spot. And so that's going to just continue and ramp up as a threat. And we have to understand how to deal with the fallout of these things. But otherwise, what's the alternative? Be a Luddite? I mean, we can't
Right.
just look at these things and say, well, they're existential threats to us when the benefits are clear. I mean, you can just continue
Hmm.
going down scientific research, for example, being able, think of people in the religious community. Like, what was it like to walk with Jesus along a path as he taught his disciples, for example, right?
Hmm.
To connect with that story, or if you're Buddhist or any other faith, like
Yeah,
to
and
be
to
able to
see
live in that
that
moment.
real place geographically, like what
Yes.
What did the skyline look like? Well, there were no towers. What did the trees and the landscape? Was it flat? Was it hilly? Was it rocky? Was it overlooking a cliff? Just to get the feeling for place,
Yes.
I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah. That context is in our imagination at best right now, but we can make that real.
That is the word that was like on the tip of my tongue is imagination. So the ability for something like this to augment your imagination. So taking what we spent so long talking about in the last episode, and if you haven't listened to that, check that out. Episode number 1 of the
Great pod.
Josh and Torrey show. So much about generative AI. So thinking about generative conceptual stuff and being able to wrap your face in it. That
Now
you
we're
can say,
talking.
okay, let's think about what this film could be, and to speak this generative command into the goggles, and then to be able to see that set and then save it, print it. Like,
Sure.
okay, this goes into the background for the scene that we're shooting next week. Uh, that's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
just that if you can think it, you can speak it, you can see it, you can save it and share it with other people and have them experience it.
Absolutely, man. And eventually that's not even spoken. Again, when we're talking about wiring into our brain waves,
Uh-huh.
it's reading our emotions in real time. Again, like the horror movie thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want to ride that roller coaster of thrill. I hate horror movies, so I don't do this. But like, that's what they're doing, right? It can measure. Hey, we've maxed them out red line for a little bit. Let's tone it down. Let's calm this down. Hang on. Let's calm this down because I
Mhm.
want to be able to scream in their face again here in a minute. And I need
Right.
that contrast, right?
We
Like they
need a
can ride
good
that the whole
jump
time.
scare.
Yeah, totally. And that's not just that's the dystopian version of it, in my opinion. Some people would love that, but you think about the other side of somebody who is struggling with loss in their life, or
Mhm.
something that's really painful for them. Are we going to, it's not even a question. We will get to the point where we understand the neurochemistry of that enough to go, hey, you know what we need to do is actually walk these people through these narrative structures that help them overcome this. This is what draws people to things like psychedelics right now. Like this thing
Mhm.
could put mushrooms out of business, man. So, I mean, seriously, it's going to become massive in the therapeutic side as well for helping
Mhm.
people to face the things they need to face in a way that they need to face it that isn't
Mhm.
traumatizing to them, whatever angle. It's a complex thing, but you get it. And that's something that's going to help a lot of people, I think.
Yeah,
And
whereas psychedelics, or sort of, again, my my experience of this is not enough to tell you anything, but what I understand is that when you go down the path of psychedelics, you're not really sure what you're going to get. It's not like you get to order up some particular experience. So a psychedelic like experience that is physician driven. Okay, now we're going to show you this, and now I think you're ready for this, and we're reading your biosigns, and now we're able to show you this next thing and this next thing, and to slowly give you exposure to the thing that you're scared of. The way that psychiatrists want you to have like this measured experience of like a little bit more, a little bit more. Okay, now you're ready for the next step. How much quote unquote safer does that feel than like we're going to make you take the substance and then just we'll see what happens.
yeah,
Good
yeah.
luck.
And
Hope it's not a
yeah,
bad one.
right, exactly. And to be fair to that community, they all say, setting, guidance, and the right
Oh,
people
sure.
that do help that. But you're right, it's a total wild card experience,
Right.
in a lot of ways. And in the clinical setting, that's why they resist that kind of thing because they want that measurable data that they can predict every time. And then again, it is about context. It's hard to know what you're improving if you don't have a metric that's actually locked down.
Hmm.
Something as simple as dosage is an issue there, right? That's why they want to synthesize things so that they can correctly say it's this exact dosage and I can measure that data with context.
Sure.
The thing that intrigues me about that is that physician won't be a physician. It won't even be a person. It is all 100% going to be an AI driven system that
Hmm.
is 1,000 times more accurate and faster than any physician and will be able to is physician the right word? Therapist, whatever. I'm like
Right.
sitting here going like talking about some dude cutting you open. That's the real people who are going to be out of business. So I get excited about this, dude. I, as an example of the white pilled version, when I think of health, relationships, wellness, creativity, exploring history, building context, interpersonal understanding, relations, like getting people on a similar page for what we're trying to work together, opportunities across the board around the entire globe for people to be able to connect and work together and collaborate. This is just, that's the, not even the intro paragraph of all the different things that we can use these for to benefit us.
Right. Maybe that's a good place to leave this.
Might have to be, because my head is killing me right now. So ground through the headache the whole time.
I was well into my backup coffee, and that's even getting low. So
that's dangerous.
We'll see where we land on this on our next episode. Good chatting with you.
You too, brother. Have a good one.
All right. You
Talk
too.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.